Yo, what's up, Sarah? How's it going?
Hey, Tony.
Welcome to Gnarly Girls. Today we have to talk about Iran because it would be nutso butso not to.
Yeah.
And I know we've done an episode already discussing how endless wars are a grape culture, but I think we have to go deeper into it because the irony of the Epstein files being searched 95% less after the war in Iran started is definitely not lost, you know? So I guess it went down like the Google search alert for Epstein files went down 95% after the war in Iran began.
Yeah. Prompt for you. I saw this on Instagram earlier today, and I was like, I must, on behalf of all of the people, ask Tony what she thinks about this to kick off this episode, unless you have somewhere you'd like to start.
No, now I'm so curious about your prompt.
Okay. Well, it's not so much of a prompt as it is. This is something I saw, and I was like, I wonder what Tony thinks about this. So this guy said, people aren't ready to hear that Israel, America, and Iran are actually all working together to artificially fulfill a Zionist doomsday prophecy to justify the global Great Reset.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so I think we need to talk about what the prophecy is
Yes.
and the word of the Bible in terms of how much the Bible is like deeply embedded in our political policy, which is so interesting to think about a book of faith being treated as historical fact of which our entire global political policy is based off of. So, you know, the evangelical Christians, I'm not sure if you saw this clip. It was like kind of circulating the past couple of days of all these people praying over Trump. So like what the thinking is, I mean, I think a lot of people, I've done a bunch of videos on this, but I think a lot of people are more hip to it now, is that the evangelical Christians believing, and a huge sect of Christianity believing that what's happening in the Middle East is ushering in the Great Reset, the second coming of Christ, the prophecy, right? So when you have that belief system and you see shit going down like war, like environmental destruction, like these like massive floods that happen, these are not signs of concern. This is not like, oh, wow, we should like address what's going on in our corporate culture, which creates an ecosystem of which this type of environmental destruction can happen. Or like, I wonder what the government's doing with their manipulated weather and how they can use weather as a tool of social control and economics. These questions are not being asked. Instead, they are seen as proof of the upcoming prophecy. So you're taking proof to build your faith, which I think is the counterintuition. Faith is not supposed to be proven. Faith is supposed to come from something deeper. So the fact that you have this like mass psychosis where all these people are trying to prove their faith through the destruction and the war efforts that are happening right now, like that is the ultimate problem. You could go ahead. We have a little cameo. Just close the door. We just have to deal with this cameo. This is just happening. So
I feel like cameos are part of it.
cameos are part of it. All right, keep going. I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, no,
it could say.
It does make sense. And I think this idea of faith coming from something deeper is a really important thing to investigate because faith is a spiritual technology. It's like the deepest connection that you decide to develop from your own experience of being in your body and being a human in the world. And I think that organized religion, specifically evangelical Christianity, teaching people that this is what faith is, then keeps them from ever reaching beneath the teachings to develop their own orientation to what God is. Like the amount of Christians who I have come into contact with, who I've been in conversations with about God, who don't actually have their own relationship with God or idea of what God is outside of what they've been told God is also deeply depressing. And then I think it's ironic that a lot of folks who like sort of use the term like the sheep and the sheeple are evangelical conservative Christians who are actually the sheep and the pawns for this entire system.
Not just them.
No, not just them, but it's interesting that they use that term more than any other group. Like if someone's like the sheeple, like most people, I would say that term comes from evangelical conservative thought. Like, oh, the sheep who are just following the left liberal media and government, which, we've discussed identity politics on this podcast 1,000 times, but it is interesting how that terminology comes from people who are quite literally following the orders of a controlling regime.
Yeah, and I think that like what that's referencing is the concept of like herd mentality and pack mentality, which we do have. Like that is real. And that is why we are so easily controlled and manipulated by systems, because we do have a herd mentality, because we are part of a pack.
Yeah.
So that's not like interesting to call people sheep. It's
Yeah.
like, yes, like that's why there's courses on like the powers of group psychology. It's not like an innovative thought. It's like, no, people are very aware of groupthink and the collective consciousness and how it is constructed and controlled.
And what is interesting, and we have talked about this on Gnarly Girls before, like there is quite a bit of prophecy fulfilling itself in terms of like indigenous prophecy. And we've talked about the Kali Yuga era of destruction ending, which is connected to indigenous prophecy and like moving into a quote unquote golden age and all these things. And I think what is important to understand is Christianity, specifically, I feel like that is like the one religion I can like talk about without getting into problematic territory. So I'm just going to stick with Christianity. There is a way that all of these like religious prophecies are quite literally built on indigenous prophecy. So it's not even like the idea that like this mass collective consciousness shift happening is incorrect. It's the way that organized religion connected to the state has always taken indigenous magic and prophecy and then inverted it and corrupted it in order to fit the agenda of the state. Because how convenient. Like real prophecy actually will not be convenient for the state. If the prophecy is convenient for the state and the people who currently are holding power, then it's a teaching that's been completely inverted, co-opted, used as a tool, as a mechanism.
Yeah, but it also could be argued that all prophecy that we're even referencing is just a reaction to observing the state.
Sure.
So it's like, indigenous prophecy comes from, oh, we have this observation of these events that are happening that are taking place in real time. And like the prophecy is that this is unsustainable, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Because it is unsustainable, right? So anyone
Yeah.
with like half a brain who had a different way of self-organizing and saw, wow, this is like incredibly toxic and violent would be like, this will fall one day. And so I think the prophecy of like of observing that people who live without relationship to the land and each other and without loyalty to the land and each other are going to fall, like makes a lot of sense too.
Yeah, it does.
So I think that the prediction is basically saying like, okay, we're going to develop this system and the system is flawed at its core. And it's very obviously flawed at its core because it takes so much effort to not only maintain it, but to like, to keep the people supporting it, right? So if at the crux, you are aware that it's going to fall, the best way to protect yourself is be like, oh, it's going to fall one day. And it falling is actually a really good thing. So let's just keep going with the system that we created that's going to get worse and worse and worse. And we know it's going to get worse because we have fucking brains. And the more it gets worse, we're just going to keep promising you this is almost the end of it, man.
Yeah.
We're almost at the end of it, man. And this is what even New Age people are saying. We're like, we're almost at the end of patriarchy because it's inverting upon itself. Because what everyone understands is that this is unsustainable. Every single human being on earth understands it's unsustainable, right? But you have just different mental gymnastics of explaining it. So the Christians are like, it's a good thing. It's a good thing because it means that the second coming of Christ. And then the New Age people are like, it's a good thing because it means that the system is breaking. Like we're all just trying to be like, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah. And it is a privileged like space to occupy because maybe you're okay right now, but there's so many people who are not okay. Let's put Iran has entered the chat at the front.
They weren't okay before, but
Of course.
the point, no one is okay. Like,
Yeah.
they haven't been okay this whole time.
So Iran entering the chat, where do we begin, Tony? How do we even, like, the fact that the Epstein file viewership is down as this is happening, it's just like these continuous like inside of the being. So where do we begin with this?
I mean, like, I think the thing to understand is that the US empire spends $1 trillion annually on its military budget. Iran spends less than 50 billion. So United States is spending 50 times more annually on its military budget. And that, just do the math. Does it sound like Iran is a threat? It's not a threat. And if you're wondering, it's like Israel was not developed because the United States military was like, oh, we need a safe haven for the Jewish people. No, it's a giant military base. It's always been a giant military base. The United States has over 800 military bases across the globe, and it is a military base. And the reason why it's effective as a military base is because it being a military base actually is beneficial to other world leaders. And like, I think that's the thing that's like fucking people's ass the most up. And I just did a video about this, like literally the reason why I was like 5 minutes late. So I was like thinking about this last night. I was like, why? Why does the US military, is it allowed to exist? Because you have China less than half of the military budget that the United States has, Russia a third. Like, why do the other world superpowers, why do we dwarf them? And not only our military bases, but our annual budget? Because it must economically behoove them to have the United States be this like military empire. And like, finally, last night when I was in meditation, I was like, why is the global predator class, why do they economically benefit from the US military? And I'm like, oh, because as long as we have a global relationship to the fear of war, every single nation will have constituents that are quote unquote dependent or are emotionally dependent on their government because they are operating under the belief that their government is going to protect them from war. So the more dependent you are on your government, the more corrupted your government will be because you will be so vulnerable to this fear of war. So as long as there is this global fear of war led by the United States, all nations can be infinitely corrupt because their citizens will believe in borders and will believe in nation states in order to protect them from war. So like the US military is part of that mirage. It is part of that global fear tactic. So as long as everyone fears war, everyone will be attached to borders and nationalism.
Do you think that the timing of what's happening in Iran is specifically because of the Epstein files and to distract from it? Or do you think it's too obvious? Do you think there's like something underneath that? Or do you think it's just that fucking obvious and like that is just what it is?
The problem is people don't understand foreign policy and they actually don't understand the history of the Middle East. And a lot of people don't even like, they'll be like, Iran attacks America. You know, it's like, where, when?
Yeah.
When did that happen? You know? So I think it's just like, oh, it's same thing. People don't know anything about Venezuela. People don't know anything about South American politics or the US intervention in creating puppet regimes in both South America and both the Middle East. So I think it's just like, it's a great way of like throwing something into the global chaos meter where people actually don't feel comfortable talking about it because they're like, I don't really know that much about it. Because most people don't. And like, I was just reading my daughter's European history. So she's taking advanced placement European history, and she was writing an essay last night on the French Revolution, right? And so she was like, I'm coming up with a thesis. Like, what's my thesis? And I'm like, it's capitalism, bitch. Your thesis is always capitalism. You're going to ask me, right? So I'm like looking at the data that like she has to write from. And I'm like, this is like it was just so obvious to me, like, from just perusing for a second. Her AP, she goes to a good school, advanced placement class. I was like, "Oh, not only is this, like, propaganda, but more importantly, this is really, undigestible information of, like, facts that have no context." Like, I could talk about the French Revolutionary War in a way that would, like, any high school person be like, "Oh, that's interesting. Huh, hmm." It's not hard to make history interesting. It is not difficult. It would be not difficult. Everyone's like, "The Middle East is so complicated. It's so complicated." Absolutely, it's not. It would just take sitting down and having a conversation and talking about regime changes, but even with all these regime changes from one Shah to another Shah to one religious fundamentalist to another religious fundamentalist, this is simple. It's about the exploitation of the wealthy. It's like the simplicity of history is so simple that we overcomplicate it in order to make people feel like dumb when they talk about it because the simplicity is just too fucking obvious. It's exploitation. It's exploitation in and out, in and out. So Iran is just like another player in the game. And like, so what does Iran do? You know, they're like, oh, Iran is going to bomb our military bases, as if Iran is an economic threat to the United States. Like, it's actually impossible.
And I do think the programming around like shoving in the facts and the data points and like making history boring and then you fall behind and then you just like don't never catch up. I mean, I definitely fall into that camp. I've shared with y'all that my US history teacher for all 4 years of high school was a Civil War reenactor who gave extra credit if you joined Young Republicans Club. So I am one of those people who like really doesn't understand the history of what's been happening in the Middle East other than what I've like scrapped together in my own like Googling, which, you know, even in researching and preparing for this episode, I just like kept hitting walls of like guilt and shame that I like don't know or like don't know how to like quite, not that I don't know how to speak on it, but it's, I'm aware that I'm missing context, you know, and like, I think that I'm not alone in that. And I think there's so many people who feel this. Like you literally feel like part of the programming and the traumatizing is that you feel too stupid to even speak on it.
Exactly. And like, okay, let's think about Syria. Like, we're still at war with Syria. That war's still going on. No one ever talks about Syria. Still happening. We're still funding what's happening in Syria. And in Syria, there was like a small subsect that was obviously impacted by the war. I think it's called Rafah. I'm pretty positive it's called Rafah. So they were like, all right, we've been demolished. We're going to rebuild. And when they rebuild, so a lot of times when people are rebuilding after being demolished, what happens? The people with guns are the ones who make the rules, right? And oftentimes the people with guns are radical extremists. So everyone's like, why is the Middle East so radically extreme? I want you to imagine if like another country came and destabilized the US and like took out our government and everyone was like freaking out. And then all the people with guns were like, we're going to make the rules now. Our country would be infinitely more conservative because the people with guns are radical, extreme conservative, often religious people, right? So the reason why the Middle East is radical and extremist right is because those were the people with the guns. And so when things were destabilized and when things were shaken up by the US military intervention, and they were also given weapons, by the way. So then you had these radical extremists. Like that's why Iran goes from a place that was very progressive that, you know, you can see, look at pictures of Iran in the 1970s. They're fashionable. They look hot. The women, they're not wearing hijab, you know, they're living like a quote unquote Western existence of like freedom, you know, and then everything changed because of US intervention. So what we have to remember is that most of the time when people are rebuilding what the US has destroyed, it's becoming conservative because those are people with guns. But in Rafah, I'm almost positive that's what it's called. These people came together and they were like, hey, let's actually build something new. Let's have a totally egalitarian society that has anarchist ideals and principles. Like, let's have women and men working together in equal footing. Let's care about the disabled. Let's care about all sexual orientations. Let's do this in a different way. So they created created like a completely different ecosystem for themselves that was rooted in something different. So when things are destroyed, it's not like it's impossible for something else to be born, but those people have to be coming at it with that ethos, and they can't be controlled by the fundamentalists with guns. And when that does happen and it does start to flourish, like I think what is happening right now with Rafa is it's being fucking destroyed. So the problem is that any sort of like subset that starts to build in the wake of destruction, if it is not extremist and it is not right wing, it will be destroyed. And then the right wing extremists will be given more ammunition, more guns, more opportunity to build a right wing conservative regime of control and religious control.
I'm coming back to what you said at the beginning in response to this person talking about, fulfilling a Zionist doomsday prophecy to justify the global Great Reset. I have heard a lot of sort of like new age spiritual folks like glamorizing the fall, the collapse, the whatever. And like to a point where like it's so focused on like things are falling apart and the collapse and we're like getting ready for the collapse, that nothing is being created. Like nothing is being created because there's this waiting for the collapse to then create, which then also what a great distraction to have people who are maybe like interested in, new ways of being in your body and new ways of expanding consciousness and, expanding more into a consciousness of love or whatever the fuck. Instead of those people being focused on what can we create, it's just waiting for this collapse. And then, we can't ignore the harvesting of the energy and the ritualized like essence and like texture beneath all of this. And I don't think it's a coincidence that like not that all land isn't sacred and holy, all land is sacred and holy. I think that's part of why, but I do think there are like portals of power like on the land and gridded all over the place, which is why I think Turtle Island, the United States of America, has become this like reigning all supreme organization because the land is so fucking powerful. And then boop, you bop right over and there you have like the Nile River and the Gaza Strip and like all of the connection to ancient Egypt and all of that magic obliterated, gone, destructed, now like moving into Iran and like moving into territory, as you're saying, where something new was like bubbling up and then getting destructed. It does feel like there is like a ritualized abuse that is motivating and part of everything that's also happening, which is maybe what the Epstein files like started to reveal beneath all the stuff that I feel like on Gnarly Girls we barely even go to, because it's like, well, there's so much stuff to talk about that we can see and touch and taste and feel. So then going into like the ritualized abuse of it all almost like distracts from what is real and the impact we can have. But I do think there is something about like the land and the ritual and the energy of it that's connected to the strategic choices that are being made based on location.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference is that everyone is waiting for collapse. But the evangelicals and the Zionists and those that are waiting for collapse for the second coming of Christ, they are not waiting for collapse to rebuild. They're waiting for collapse to be saved.
Right.
I think the new age people or the other people who are waiting for collapse are waiting for collapse to rebuild. And I know there's the argument that Buckminster Fuller has where it's like you cannot fight the existing reality. You have to build a new reality that's so compelling that it makes the existing reality obsolete. And I understand that logic. And I think people are trying to do it with intentional communities. I think people are trying to do it in the sense that they're like, let's take back the land, let's farm, let's build urban gardens, let's do all this stuff. It's not like that's not happening. That is happening. However, in order for the mass exodus to take place, it is going to be through collapse because the mass exodus isn't taking place. Without it. And maybe it's not. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it will. But I think that like why there is this like waiting for the shoe to drop kind of vibes, because it is that. I think everyone's waiting for the shoe to drop and everyone's waiting to see what will happen, is because to build the new paradigm while exiting the capitalist system. I mean, I think people are trying, but they're still participating in capitalism. Like, you really have to be totally fucking off the grid to not be participating in the system. And just like, I mean, how many people are truly, truly equipped to be off the grid? Like, only like people with that true indigenous knowledge that have been doing it this whole time. I don't really know. I mean, like, maybe some, but like to shift completely off the grid, I don't know. It's not having the mass exodus it could. That's clear.
Yeah, and like unfortunately, I do think the primary like push for living off the land and sort of divesting and all of these things, other than indigenous communities who have already been doing that with, I don't even understand how, well, maybe I'll say I have so much respect for the commitment to that amidst like the amount of ways that the US government has tried to just continuously disrupt that. But most people who I see doing this are white people with privilege, which is complicated when like you don't have to necessarily divest from white supremacy or patriarchy to be in relationship with the land and, you know, create a new culture, society, whatever it is, community, whatever it is that you're desiring to do. And I think that's why
You're still buying clothes, you're still going to the call, you're still participating in the economy. Like, I see people like, present company included, like myself. I'm like anti-capitalist, but then I'm completely participating. I drive my car, I go to my business, I da 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 da, like I buy a sweatshirt. I'm like trying to buy sustainable and I try to get the things, but then, oh, it's coming from the mailing system and FedEx sent it. And like, it is literally, as long as you are participating in capitalism, which we all are, there are very few people who are truly outside of that. We're part of the problem, and that's why we're waiting for the collapse, because we're comfortable and we like it. We like being inside. We like the heat. We like the internet. We like the TV. We're so comfortable. We like it. And we don't want all of that to stop. And somehow we're like, well, is there a way to like have all of this, but like just like not have pedo cannibals rule the world? And I think that's our prayer.
yeah. I mean, yes, do not take away my TV. And yeah, I guess what I'm saying too is like you can be consciously divesting from capitalism and doing all these things and still be fucking racist and like upholding patriarchy within your community that is connected to the land. And I think that's why like a lot of people of color and more like queer folks and people who are not sort of like within the TikTok trad wife culture that is erupting, there's almost like it's almost like a turnoff. It's like that is for like the white people who are going back to wearing skirts and looking like the pilgrims, And
Dr. Quinn, medicine woman vibes.
I don't even know who that is, but I already don't like it. I already don't like it.
You don't know Dr. Quinn, medicine woman? Look her up when you get off the call.
Who is she?
It was a TV show.
Oh. Yeah. So it's like that. Even like the back to the land journey has been co-opted by white supremacy and patriarchy, and it like
privilege,
which is like this at the root of those things. Okay, so, what do we do? How can we best exist right now with the amount of information that we have that is far more than we had at the end of January? It's like the last 6 weeks, the last like moon cycle and a half, especially since Saturn moved into Aries, which feels very pertinent, like the structure of our entire culture, like moving into the energy of like fire and new beginnings and like war energy and just like intensity. What do you feel the best thing we can do is, other than get your courses and download the morning practice and join the Gnarly People Patreon, because you can access Tony's morning somatic practice right now and a course that I also just dropped in the Gnarly People Patreon, linked in the description. But other than like our somatic practice, our spiritual practice, maybe when it comes to like researching, taking in information, educating ourselves, especially for people who maybe don't have as good of like a history background, or like are having like guilt and shame and fear coming up around like sort of not knowing how to put the pieces together, but like want to use their voices and like use their energy to make an impact. What do you suggest?
I mean, I don't think the point is for everyone to become like a scholar. I think the point is that for everyone to understand how the war machine is affecting them, even though, like, in America, in the United States right now, it's affecting you in a very quantum way, right? So it's like, if you don't think that, like, it doesn't affect your sleep when people are being bombed in Iran, you're wrong, you know? If you don't think that it doesn't affect your nervous system when people are being bombed in Gaza, you're wrong. It does. And I know a lot of people feel that. And then, but it's not to feel it to the point where it destabilizes you, where you are paralyzed. You should feel it to the point of action. And the action is not like, it's like, I feel like I made a video about this. I keep saying this, is that the cultural assumption that corrupt people are ruling systems of power. Like, this is the cultural assumption we have. Corrupt people rule systems of power. And I'm telling you, systems of power corrupt people. Systems of power corrupt people. That is it. So as long as we have these systems of power, there is going to be corrupt people, because that's what a system of power does. It corrupts people. And so in order for that to change, it starts with changing our own relationship to power. Like, I don't see any other way, because that is why we keep buying into the system, because ultimately that's what we are doing. We are buying into it. And it's, when we talk about the system, we talk about the matrix. It is power over another.
Yeah. And I guess like, how are we doing that? I guess starting with our relationship with ourselves. Like, are we being that with ourselves? Are we upholding that paradigm of thought and behavior and belief in the way that we're even like organizing our day or approaching the work that we're doing? Or, yeah, like the abuse starts within our own mind, body, nervous system. And then how are we functioning in our homes, going to like the next sort of like little ring of relationship. And then how are we functioning like in our communities? It sounds so humdy-dum, but I do think that, yeah, it's like we want the answer to be more complicated and like almost extravagant to distract us from how annoyingly simple the action that we can take is, that is impactful and like lasting.
Yeah. Because it's not going to matter if we just rebuild another power structure.
No, no, no. And it's heartbreaking to re-enter that and be like, oh, wait, this is the same thing in like a different outfit and a different community and a different, it branded differently, but it's the same consciousness.
I mean, I see it all the time, like with like, oh, we're a little community. We're a community. We're reacting to the community of the capitalist structure, and we're creating a new community. And that community is still super grapey, super exploitative, not very self-reflective, filled with power struggles and structure. And it's like, okay, like, you're the same thing. You just created a microcosm of what it is you're rebelling against. It's the same thing. So that's going to keep happening until we change. And again, I believe in generational curse breakers because I've seen it with my own eyes, like generational curse breakers within families. We've all seen it. People that like break cycles of abuse. But if you break a cycle of abuse and you're white knuckling it, it's still within you. So there has to be like the next step. And like, I do believe a lot can change in a generation or two because I've seen it with my own eyes, but it will only be through genuine embodied digestion. It's not going to be through a facade or pretense or just like putting on the identity of it. You can put on the identity for a certain amount of time, but you will buckle.
Yeah. And I think it's also being suspicious of anyone who's like, I'm the leader, like without that person being chosen to lead something, you know, or like the idea of there being one leader.
The thing about leadership comes ego, and I think this is where, like, I do really fuck with, the philosophy of, Socrates Johnson, my boy Socrates, is even though this is, like, through the mouthpiece of Plato and the Greeks are highly flawed, but, Socrates Johnson, he does he does talk about this concept of, like, the only people fit to be king are philosophers because those are the only ones who do not want to.
Yeah.
And the only people that are fit to lead are those that will not be corrupted by hierarchy and that understand, okay, like I might have a skill of leadership, but that skill is no more valuable than the shoe cobbler because I need shoes.
Yeah.
So if you can keep yourself in check and like not, like it's the better than, this is what I keep saying. As long as you think you're better than someone, you ain't fit to lead.
Yeah.
But a good leader is like, I am just happen to have a skill set that's this skill set, which is as valuable as any other skill set that anyone has. Anytime you think you're unique or special, you're a problem.
I think this is why people are also suspicious of community or coming into community, or like, you know, I even experienced this in like running a quote unquote coven or whatever. Like there's been a lot of trauma that's happened like under the umbrella of community. And it's interesting because I do think that's a solution, and it's radical and it's resistance and it's all the things that we need is to come together. But then also in the coming together, all of the Grape patterns and programming comes out.
That's
And
why so
so,
many gurus are grapers with
right,
these like amazing philosophies
right.
because they're corrupted against systems of power corrupt people. So as long as you worship a person, they're going to get corrupted. Like unless they have the capacity to like deflect the worship, which is why the most like spiritual people do what? They go into a cave and they're silent alone because they're like, this is the spiritual path. I sadly have to go.
I think I'm going to end with, this is why we always have to like question what God is to us. And like, even for the people out there who are like, the goddess, like me, it's also constantly questioning, like, what is that energy? Um, in not even in opposition, but in relationship and in like a philosophical investigation of what the goddess has been presented to us as. And I think that's where it's like every single time it comes back to sovereignty, which is not the same as individualism. It's actually like a radical fucking accountability and a willingness to continue asking questions. And I think like even right now, especially, it's not about like landing. It's about this like continuous momentum forward, which is very year of the horse. So we will just keep galloping and having conversations with you. And thank you for sharing your Middle Eastern knowledge with us, Tony, because I'm sure there's people out there like myself who are like, I need to know more. So thank you.
We all need to know more, girl.
We all need to know more.
Same. Always saying we need to know more. Bye. I love you.
Namaste. I love you. Peace. Bye, everyone.